Welcome on into a Wednesday edition of Card Central 365. All content brought to you by DraftKings. The crown is yours. Joe Roderick, Brenden Schaeffer with you here on a Wednesday. Brenden, as we continue on watching the 2025 postseason, we watch all of these clutch performances, these superstars either in the making or arriving at the big stage. You know, every game that I watch, I still tend to look at it from a Cardinal rose-colored glasses type of standpoint, maybe more bitterness with them not being in the mix this year. But it makes you wonder, and it makes you kind of contemplate into the future of this Cardinal team. Like, who could be this superstar that we see these other teams have? And man, Mason Wynn, it seems like it's, still a lot to be desired of him. We haven't seen JJ Weatherholt on the big league roster yet. So I ask you, Von Herrera, could he be this next superstar for the Cardinals? Could he be this guy that we're just kind of hitching a wagon onto in the postseason and watch him become a star on the national stage?
I mean, offensively, he might be the best candidate in the organization that's going to be here for the long haul, like that we figure is going to be here the next time the Cardinals reach October, because I think Wilson Contreras is another big name bat that if we had a chance to see him in a postseason scenario with the Cardinals, it might go well, but I don't know if we're going to get to see that because A, could be traded if he approves it this offseason, and B, contract only goes for a couple more years, and I think there's legitimate question as to whether the Cardinals can get back to October baseball in that time frame. So Herrera would be, I guess, the name that you'd look at. He led the Cardinals in OPS this past season. What was he? Near the team lead in homers, one behind Wilson Contreras. But I think it's interesting because a lot of our conversations surrounding why the Cardinals maybe aren't in position to be playing in October right now is this idea that they don't have that tentpole superstar, set it and forget it. He's going to be there, and he's going to come up in the big moments and the small moments and all the moments. And that's like part of our sort of takedown of the Cardinal rosters to say, like, they haven't had this guy, and so that's a reason that they're not in October. But Herrera can develop into that. I also, though, wonder if you need more than one of them if you're the Cardinals, right? If you're close enough to be able to get to the playoffs with just the one, or if they're going to have to develop more. Herrera, I guess, would be the leading candidate at this point, and we saw some really good things from him, like his first full season at the plate. Missed a lot of time due to injury, but it was, a pretty full season for him. And if he's able to replicate the rate stats and then just span it out over 150 games instead of what he played due to injury this past season, I think he's definitely in position to be that kind of guy, Joe. But it's also hard to kind of anticipate and say, what will a guy do in the big moment, in the clutch moment? It feels like Herrera's maybe got that clutch gene a little bit, had a number of huge home runs for the Cardinals in key spots within games this year anyway. But I don't know. It's an interesting quandary.
Yeah, and if you go to and you dive into Baseball Reference and you go to the split section of it, they go into their own, they have numbers as far as you mentioned the clutch gene for a guy like Von Herrera and what that looks like in every single one of his quote clutch stats. For the most part, I still kind of say that same thing. It does say that, he does show up in big moments, that he doesn't let the high leverage situations kind of get to him in those games where some guys would kind of cower away. 2 outs, runners in scoring position this past year, OPS still above 800, batting average 286 in those moments. Tie games, games where they were down a run, and hitting over 300 with OPS is over 900. Those are things where you mentioned it. You think about some of the big hits that Von Herrera had this year, and they all seem to happen in those late inning, guys on base. You needed him to come up at the right time, and Von Herrera always seemed to perform in those situations.
Yeah, I'm trying to find, I don't have like the final tally on it, but I'm reading a story from John Denton from September the 2nd, in which it was described as Herrera hit his 6th go-ahead home run in the 6th inning or later, which at the time was tying with Kyle Schwarber for the National League lead in that category. So it's not just our in our heads and our imaginations where he was this type of player in 2025. It was legitimate. It actually played out that way, the way that you feel like, man, this guy's really had a lot of those moments. It turns out he did, relative to the rest of the league too. It was something that was a bit of a calling card for Herrera, which again is impressive when you consider that he had 2 stints on the injured list that were relatively lengthy. So he didn't get the chance to put together a full season. But certainly, I think with the way that we thought about Ivan Herrera coming into 2025, it was, all right, question about can he hold it down behind the plate? Because we think he's a pretty good bat, and you certainly want to have him in there. But I think at the time, you were really thinking, okay, his version of a good bat, is he going to match the 800 OPS that he had in 2024? That was in a more limited sample, 259 plate appearances. That's pretty good. 800 OPS, you can find a way to play. But I think there was also this sentiment that was like, can he be justified in the everyday DH role with all the kind of DH-y type of players that the Cardinals had on the roster? Was his bat going to be enough to justify that if he wasn't going to be able to stick behind the plate? I still go back to before the season down in Jupiter at spring training, watching him take batting practice and having John Mozeliak sitting next to me and at just casually asking, you think this guy's in for a big year, a big step forward? And immediately the things Mo talked about was, well, we really eager to see him behind the plate, wanted to see that step forward from him. Obviously we didn't get that. The Cardinals did not see a step forward from Ivan Herrera behind the plate, but I think the version of him that they saw at the plate was even as optimistic as they may have been in the organization and always talking about, oh, this guy just loves to hit. He's a hitter. I think he probably exceeded expectations with the season that he was able to put together. And maybe just as important, had the gaudy numbers, but then kind of tailed off, picked it back up toward the end of the season to sort of, I guess, re-solidify what he could be offensively. And look, an 837 OPS, I do think that is justifiable to have as your DH. They're talking now about putting him back behind the plate, getting him the cleanup elbow procedure that he had, and seeing if that can impact him in a positive way, throwing as a catcher. That's great, and I hope that works out, because if he can be a league average defensive catcher or a little bit above that, I think what he brings at the plate as a batter morphs him into one of the more valuable players in the National League. I really do believe that. He's still valuable as a designated hitter or as a corner outfielder if that's where you have to stick him. I do think, though, hopefully in this mission to find out whether he can be a catcher, hopefully you don't lose any of that offensive punch, because I think if you do look at terms of like the power and the hard hit data and just what he can bring as a complete hitter, he's about as good as anybody you've got in the organization. And so force feeding the catcher stuff, hopefully that doesn't take away from what he brings offensively, wear and tear on the body, wear and tear on the knees, those sorts of things. Worth it, I think, in a rebuild type of situation to explore it behind the plate one more time, because if it costs you a few games in the standings, it's not the end of the world, because you're not really projecting to be competitive in the standings anyway. But certainly I hope they don't lose the punch at the plate, because I agree, he is probably the best case they have to be the next clutch, big time, middle of the order bat. Mr. October, you've got labeled there on the headline. I think he could be that. It's just, I think, a matter of getting the Cardinals there and then allowing him the opportunity to explore what that looks like at the plate.
Get our final thoughts on this in just a second, but first, Missouri, get ready. The wait's almost over. DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook, coming soon to the Show Me State. On December 1st, when they launch, you can get $300 in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and place a $5 bet when we go live. That's the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Download it now. Use code STL Sports to grab $300 in bonus bets with just $5. You bet $5 when we go live on December 1st, and use code STL Sports in partnerships with DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 21 plus, physically present in Missouri. Eligibility restrictions apply. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Excludes customers who redeem pre-launch sign-up offer. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos. As you continue to kind of look through the numbers, as I was mentioning earlier, just the runners in scoring position, just all those numbers that you want a guy to have. The runners in scoring position, 348 average with a 982 OPS. And as you look through the Ivan Herrera season, he did have that strong ending of the year in September, where again, technically the Cardinals weren't out of it. They were still in the mix. If you look at the standings for that, and in September might have put forward his best month outside of the start that he had the first week of the season. But in 24 games in the month of September, he had those 8 home runs and an OPS of 969. So when the Cardinals needed wins, it wasn't his fault that they weren't able to come down and win it at the end of the year.
And I think that was important to see from Herrera because his OPS had tailed below 800 at one point. And it was like, okay, he looked like an MVP caliber name in the early portion of the season, and those numbers didn't hold up. So when you're going into the offseason and wanting to evaluate for the future, what level of upside does he bring? What level of consistency can you expect? Seeing that in a sample like September, where it wasn't just like a week or two, it was a good full month that he turned things back around and got his end of season numbers to where they were, I think is important if you're prognosticating and projecting for, all right, like what will the Cardinals lineup look like? And Aaron mentioning that Herrera's okay, but they need more like 4 more studs. And I agree with that I think they either need to go get those additional players, which is going to happen from drafting, developing, maybe a savvy trade here or there. It's not going to be splashes in free agency. We just know that is the situation at this point. But I also think you're looking at some of the other guys internally and going, can that guy take a step forward? That's going to probably determine the degree to which the Cardinals are able to make this a less painful rebuild. Like you mentioned Mason Wynn in evaluating, okay, who are the guys on this roster that could become the type of postseason breakout star that we're seeing across the game during these league divisional series. Mason Wynn offensively feels like the type of guy that could become that. But when you look at his numbers, they just haven't stacked up to this point. It's been the last couple of years where it's like he's not terrible, but this is very decidedly average, maybe even a little below average offensively. There are tools to his game that I think would lead you to believe he's got that within him. And obviously, I'm not taking him down a peg because he played through injury for the majority of this season and, tried to gut through it and grit through it. And I think probably the numbers at the plate were not an accurate representation of what we can expect Mason Wynn to bring next year if he's healthy. But that's just the reality, is like the guys that we would lean to and go, what about this guy? We're seeing the numbers and going, well, he's got an OPS of 6 something and it is not consistently impactful enough for us to believe that that's going to be the case with him. And time will tell. Here's a comment calling the premise here ludicrous, Joe. The Cardinals aren't going to be playing in October next year or the year after that. Where do you stand on just the premise of the conversation? Is it important for the Cardinals to have this guy in 2026 and identify like who could be the real tentpole if in fact they're kind of just muddling along at 75 wins or whatever the case may be? What's the timeline for where it's necessary to identify whether the Cardinals have a guy like this in-house?
Yeah, he's only 25 years old. So he's only 25 years old. And this past year was the first year that he was given an opportunity to be an everyday starter. So I think for that aspect that, yeah, I think you look at him being a part of this team still in 28, 29.
He's still eligible, not a free agent until like 2030. So.
Right. So when we sit here and when we talk about the next Cardinal window to be in the playoffs, and we're talking about 2028, I think Ivan Herrera is most certainly in those plans. If you look at a Cardinal whiteboard and look ahead to what the team might look like and who's still going to be in the organization.
Yeah, and I think I'll rank them if 28 is the year that we're talking about. I'll rank them Herrera number 1. I'm trying to decide if it's Weatherholt or if it's Burleson number 2. And I think it's Burleson. I don't want to put that level of expectation on Weatherholt. Like, I think he's going to be a really good big leaguer and a really good contributor for the Cardinals. But I don't know, like, what's his ceiling offensively, I think is a difficult question to answer until we see him at the big league level. And I don't know that he's going to be maybe the raw home run power that Ivan Herrera has and hopefully will continue to develop and maintain at that point. Burleson, I think, has a little bit more of that he can tap into. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be home run power to turn into this type of Mr. October, but that usually helps, So yeah. I would say Herrera 1, maybe Burleson 2. I'd have to check on his his timeline before free agency. He's not eligible until 2029, so 1 year less than Herrera, but still a good length of time of team control there. And then Weatherhold, I'd put at number 3. Probably Mason Wynn at number 4, hoping that he develops into the player that I think, like, we've seen him be that on defense. What can he turn into to become a complete shortstop and hitter at the plate, become one of the most valuable players in baseball? I use that line about Herrera because I think if he's average defensively behind the plate at a very difficult position and can maintain what he is offensively, that carries a lot of value. For Mason, it's almost the opposite. We know what he is defensively, and it's great. He should win the Gold Glove this year. Can he turn into a player that's like a little bit above league average offensively, and then suddenly we're talking about just how valuable he is? Was a 2.2 WAR according to Baseball Reference this past season, but he did that OPSing 673 with an OPS plus of 90. For his career, he's an OPS plus of 91. That's 9% below league average. But I think the raw tools there keep Mason Wynn at number 4 on this list for me if we're talking about 2028. I don't know if, Joe, if there's anybody else that I'm overlooking that you would place higher than what I've got.
No, I think what you're, until we see some of those other ones, there's nobody that I would look at that I would say are above the list that you just gave. And that list is a good topic for another day. Let us know your thoughts, though, on this one about Ivan Herrera, or who else you think it is that could step up and be that next superstar in the month of October when the Cardinals eventually play in October again. This has been another edition of Card Central 365, brought to you by DraftKings. The crown is yours. He's at Brenden Schaeffer. I'm Joe Roderick. Talk to you tomorrow.